motivation. And I wanted to end with a few thoughts on happiness. I mean, everyone is looking for happiness. When I was reading your you ink papers, people talk about happiness. Uh, so I thought I would share a few ending thoughts on that. But I wanted to go through just some thoughts on motivation and that one survey I asked you to fill out, if you happen to do it for coming tonight, is one of the better ones I've found, and I've discussed that a little bit later on. Um, so let me share and talk a little bit about motivation. And motivation is um, one of those topics that sometimes if you ask yourself what motivates, you wonder what motivates other people. Start with yourself. What motivates you? And a lot of what motivates you is not too dissimilar from what might motivate others. But what I want to kind of talk about a little bit tonight are I I, I mean I'm going to talk about four basic ways of thinking about motivation, and I think this covers um, almost anyone in the workplace that you might run into. One of these four, a combination of four. And I think it's important to understand some of this, but I've mentioned this before. What do organizations really want from people? Well, they want performance and they want commitment. And what I mean by performance is they want people who are going to get the job done that you hope to get. And they want a sense of commitment, not necessarily loyalty, but I'm committed to what I'm doing. If I'm with you, I'm committed. And I think that's what most organizations want. And what does that mean to have people uh, performing at their best and being committed? And that's why I like this topic of motivation. And motivation is related to performance and ability. What leads to performance? Do we have the ability? And what's the situation like uh, that leads to performance? So what's happening situational? And am I asking someone to do a job that they have the ability to do? So, sometimes you'll get poor performance in an organization, and you have to ask yourself four basic questions. How difficult is the task? How capable are the people to do it? How hard is the individual trying to do the work? And do we need to consider improving the people? So, I often have talked to people who said, this person's a poor performer. And the first question you have to ask, are you dealing with an ability problem or an attitude problem? And, sometimes people who aren't performing, it's an ability issue. Sometimes you're giving people a job that they're not prepared for. Um, and if it's an attitude problem, then maybe we're talking about motivation. Just backing up a little bit, motivation comes from the Latin word to move. And when you're thinking about your own motivation, if I ask you to do something, are you going to move in a direction to do it? But also, how much effort are you going to put into it? How intensely are you going to do it? And then how persistent are you going to be? Are you going to stick at it? So those are all captured in motivation, and you'll see some textbooks talking about motivation leads to performance if there are certain outcomes associated with that performance that leads to satisfaction. So, performance is a product of ability times motivation. And motivation really is our desire and commitment. So I kind of like this as a little way to think of motivation. And what I'm going to talk about are four different ways to think about motivation. Now, the textbook doesn't talk about it in the same way, but the textbook really strives to get at it. This is a model of thinking about motivation called expectancy. And basically it says is what this says is I am going to put out effort if I think I can do the work. So that deals with self-efficacy. Do I believe I can do the job? How much confidence do I have in myself to perform? So if I feel confident that I can do it, I'm going to exert some effort. Now, my performance, if I perform and work hard, am I going to get certain outcomes, whatever they are? And will they be satisfying to me? So what value do you put on outcomes? They can be positive or negative. So you maybe if you don't perform, you're going to get certain negative outcomes. But the highest performance comes if there's and these outcomes you get can be intrinsic or extrinsic. That can be money, that could be psychological gain. And it's idiosyncratic to you. How much value do you put on these things? And I think this model, a lot of times when you're studying motivation, you start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've probably all seen that. Basically, what the needs are outcomes you think you're going to get from doing something. So Maslow's hierarchy, it's one way to talk about motivation, but but actually what Maslow's talking about are outcomes you get from doing something. I think this model in some way explains a lot of our motivation. You think about it a little bit. How much confidence do I have in myself? Do I feel like I can do the job? Well, our self-confidence comes from maybe past accomplishments. We were successful in the past, or maybe I see somebody else doing it, and you say I can do the same thing, or maybe you have someone that coaches you, and your emotions are positive. And so, if you think you can do the job, you analyze the task, and you think the situation's right, it leads to you feeling confident. And if you go back in the model we were looking at, whoops, let me go back in this model, then it's going to lead to performance. I think this explains, I think you probably would agree that this explains a lot of people's motivation. Would you think it explains some of yours? I'm going to perform if I think I can do it. And if I get certain outcomes that are valuable to me, I'll do it. And I think most of you would agree this explains a lot of performance or a lot of our motivation. And it deals with self-efficacy. You have to be confident. And then here are some of the common needs. These are from Maslow and others. Some of the accomplishments you get out of performance, maybe self-esteem, self-actualization, maybe a sense of any of these things could be needs. Here are some intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, bonuses, promotions, praise. Some intrinsic, maybe it's interesting or I have a sense of accomplishment. So these are all different outcomes. Now, before I didn't want to get to this slide yet. So that's that model of self-efficacy. It's called expectancy theory, which I think for a lot of us would explain a lot of motivation. But another, I'm going to throw this out to you, and I'm going to ask you to put some information in chat for me. If if I offered you $2,000, that seems like a pretty good fee. If I offered you $2,000 to come over here to Lansdale and help with a project, and I'm gonna pay you $2,000 for coming for about 3 hours, pretty good fee. And would you be motivated to come over and help me out? You just type yes. But well, I'm going to ask you to type a number with yes or no. And if I gave you the $2,000, how intensely do you think you would work with me? On this, so if you say yes, you'd like the 2 grand, how hard do you think you would work with me on that? Number 0 to 10. So I'm going to open chat and see what you're all saying. So I'm getting a yes and a 10, yes and a 9, yes and a 10, a 9, yes. Okay, 8. All right. Anyone else? Now, same situation. You just discovered that a few other people I offered $3,000. And based on this new information, you've already agreed to come over. What do you think it might do to your effort? And it looks like it might be going down a little bit. Anyone explain what's going on there? Anyone want to jump in and explain what's happening? Don't be shy. Why'd your numbers go down? Someone said decreased motivation. You can jump on and verbally answer if you want.
Well, we probably, this is Chris. We probably feel maybe devalued. Uh, Perhaps our work initially wasn't considered to be uh, as important to you than perhaps the other group. Maybe you thought you'd get more out of them. You give them a little more. Maybe you thought less of us. You give us a little less. Maybe we're not the high performers that you might expect, so you give us a lower rate.
Doesn't sound fair, does it?
No.
Well, that first thing I talked about with motivation doesn't totally explain motivation. This second thing I ask you to do, well, the second is gets at let me bring it up, a theory, and which I think explains a lot of behavior. It's called equity theory, and equity and basically we have a built-in mechanism. All of us have a built-in mechanism where we compare ourselves to other people we work with. And we love to know a lot of things like salary or perks or all that. And we feel, okay, what equity theory says, if what I put into a job and I get outcomes, if they equal what you put into the job and outcomes, there's equilibrium, and I feel okay. But what would happen, and please jump in and feel free to share, what would happen though when you're out of equilibrium, like in this situation? How might you act? How might someone act if you feel unfair? Anyone want to jump in? What might that lead to? Oh my goodness, this is a shy group.
It could be more of an extreme behavior, or so they could try to rebalance what they feel is fair. Uh,
You might work less,
yeah.
might not work as hard.
I
Or,
probably have a bad attitude.
well, you change your attitude, you get, uh, you might start looking for another job. Yeah, the theory would say that we try and bring equilibrium, get things back. And I really like this because I think we do it all the time in the workplace. What about the other way? How about the imbalance the other way, where you're getting a lot more people, you're getting a lot more benefit than others doing the same work. How do you react to that? I don't know if it's ever happened to you or not. And
I think
you go ahead.
I was going to say you see it in uh, you see it in industries where you have a more experienced workforce, perhaps making a higher rate than a newer employee, even though they're doing the same work. You know, seniority and longevity in the workforce may have them at a higher pay rate, and then there causes some unbalance and some
Yeah,
possibility of uneasiness. You see it in nursing a lot.
well, sometimes if you're making more than others that are same, you might try and work a little harder, you know, or you might cognitively tell yourself, "Well, I'm worth it." So, in any case, we want to bring it into balance.
Yeah.
Um, but I really think this helps explain a lot of motivational behavior of people, is this sense of fairness, and it's not always rational. And it's not always necessarily based on the right information. And you know, here are some of the outcomes. Um, you know, pay, seniority, benefits, and then all the inputs are your effort, performance, skills, and abilities, your training, seniority. All of these factors work in there. You know, the next one, which I think is very powerful. Are any of you athletes in here, or do running or stuff like that? Yeah, you know, typically what you do is you set goals for yourself. And this is a very powerful motivator for people. Uh, the very fact of setting goals is motivational in and of itself. And the goals that are the most motivating to people are goals that they have a say in, or the most and the highest motivated goals are ones you set for yourself. So specific and difficult goals can be very strong motivators for people, and and those motivators um, also have an impact on the intensity, how hard you're going to work, persistence, and that leading to performance. And goal setting, just any of you that are athletes and out like that, and in your own organizations, I suspect that there's a lot of goal setting that goes on. Is that accurate? That in most of your organizations, you have goals that you're given for the year or for a period, and so so people get real committed to goals that are there's good rewards or there's publicity associated with them. You get a lot of support if you participate in goal setting, and if people feel like they have the resources. Another thing on goal setting is that the best goals are those that are difficult, but not impossible. So difficult goals lead to uh, maximizing performance. And then, so a couple things, the more difficult goals lead to higher performance, more specific goals lead to higher effort. And then goals that are accepted have a big impact on effort. And so if people participate in goal setting strategy meetings, they're going to tend to want to buy into them. And then I think we talked about this, SMART goals. always good to think about SMART goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and there's a time frame. I always love this one. There's a big difference between saying we want to be the highest quality space exploration industry in the world. That's a goal. But President Kennedy gave us this one. We will put a man on the moon within a decade and return him safely to Earth. Now, there's a SMART goal that has all 5 of those elements. So setting goals is an important part of motivation. Have you ever heard of MBO? Anyone ever hear of MBO? When I was ending up the MBA program, just finishing my MBA program, MBO was the gigantic buzzword in management literature. It was called Management by Objectives. And there were books that came out, tons of books that came out on the top of the organization setting goals, and goals went right down the organization, all the way from top to bottom to the individual, and everyone aligned. And boy, that led to optimal performance for the organization. Everyone was getting goals. And it really was a phenomenal motivator throughout the organization. We don't use the buzzword anymore, but I think goal setting is a pretty natural part of a lot of organizations. Where you're asked to submit goals for the year, or do any of you do that? Any in your jobs, setting goals?
Yes.
Yeah. What happens? Oh, is that,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
how does that process work, Christine?
We usually have like bolder priorities that we set for the year for ourselves, but then there's also ones that come from higher up, like the department, and then also for like the company that we have to set for the year. And then we evaluate ourselves at the end of the year. And then I guess our managers evaluate us basically.
Okay.
And if we hit those priorities.
So I think all of this has survived from that big a big management push. I think goal setting has survived. It's like empowerment. I remember when empowerment was a major buzzword in the management literature, and organizations were developing empowerment. Well, empowerment's still there, but we just don't use the buzzwords anymore. The thought behind the concepts were very strong. And I'm going to throw something else out at you. I just want you to think about job satisfaction a little bit. And it maybe in the chat box, put in maybe 1 or 2 words things that give you job satisfaction and work. And I'll just keep track. Just type it in. Work-life balance is one. Just 1 or 2 word things to bring you satisfaction. Positive feedback. All right. Making a tangible impact. All right. Anyone else have anything that hits them on satisfaction? No drama, peaceful feedback. Okay. What you do matters, and these are all important. Professional growth. All right. In a job situation, there are about 15 or 16 attributes that that people have talked about and that's been studied surveys on. And here are the 5 top. and I think you've hit on some of these, your pay, your promotion, your supervisor, your boss, your coworkers, and the type of work you do. Which one of these do you think is going to turn out one on the list? One or two on the list? Why don't you throw your guesses in the chat, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. What do you think the one or two is? Who do you think the top two? Pay and promotion. D, co-workers, boss, supervisor, boss, promotion, pay and work, promotion. Okay, just remember all five are important, but some of the let me see, I got another one in there. Pay and supervisor. Some research that's been done, and these are the five. Green, all of these elements, green and yellow, is a very high correlation. Satisfaction with these, these elements leads to overall high job satisfaction. The green represents a very, very strong correlation. And the work itself and your coworkers and your boss, extremely strong. Promotion, that's a high correlation, and pays a high correlation. So all of them are high correlations, but the strongest, and it's interesting, the work itself you do, is really critical in terms of leading to satisfaction. You might have great pay, but if you have a crappy job and a crappy boss and crappy coworkers, while you'll still get some satisfaction from the pay, it might not totally lead to overall job satisfaction. With your coworkers, basically what you want is someone that has your back and you like them. A lot of studies, these are two big things we want in coworkers. In a boss, basically what we want is someone we know is going to support us and we like them. Those are two of the big characteristics of bosses, that they're going to make sure help us get our job done. The survey I asked you to do, let me stop for a minute. I'm going to talk a little bit about, maybe if you can share some of your scores on it. The survey I had you mentioned to do that we were going to discuss tonight has to do with the work itself that you do and the elements that go into that. How were some of your scores there? If anyone wants to share.
Mine was 75.
Okay.
And I redid it because I didn't think you could score that low at first. It's 75.
How do you feel about your job, I would ask?
I don't know.
Okay. Anyone else?
It's a job.
Okay, it's a job.
I got a 138.
How do you feel about your job, Cooper?
I feel good. I definitely resonate more with what we just talked about. I care more about my coworkers and about what I personally do. So that kind of aligns.
Okay. Anyone else want to share their scores?
I had a 156, but believe me, it took me years to find a job where I would score a 156. So the current role that I'm in, I feel like I finally, and I'm 56 years old. So it took me 56 years.
I think they say scores of 150 or above.
Yeah, it said 150 or below. Your work tasks may not be below 150. Your work tasks may not be so satisfying.
Okay. I have found when people take this in here, that it correlates with some of their job satisfaction elements. Let me talk about what the survey was measuring. I think I think there is an awful lot to this, the work itself that you do. By the way, there's an extremely high correlation between job satisfaction and life satisfaction. A lot of these surveys that are being done, that have been done out there. And the reason for that is so much of our life is spent working. And so it's natural that, a large percentage of your overall life satisfaction would come from the work that you're doing. So let me, this is what's called kind of psychological empowerment. This is, some of these things were covered a little bit in the, empowerment chapter. So for a lot of times in professional jobs, this work itself you do is, how meaningful is it that you do? And some of you brought that up. Or do you have a kind of, how much autonomy or self-determination, or how much control do you have? How much of an impact are you making? And how much competence, or, can you see the results of your work? And this survey, that psychological empowerment, this survey, if you look at it, if you look at the various letters on the survey, it measures the variety of your work. I is identity, and S is significant. How much can you identify, or do you get to know the product of what you're doing? All of those things go into the making up maybe the meaningfulness of the work that you do. The variety, identity, significance. The autonomy has to do with how much control do you have, or how much responsibility do you have over it. And then the F is the feedback. What kind of knowledge are you getting back on the results? Now, all of this assumes that you have the knowledge and the skill, and it also assumes that you want to grow. There are some people out there who just want to go to a job and do what I have to do and leave. They're not looking for growth. They're not looking to get new knowledge and skills. They want to go in and perform. But I tend to think that's a lower part of the population than we might assume. And then all of that leads to satisfaction with the work itself that you do. So these 4 areas that I talked about tonight so far, I really think it helps explain a lot of the behavior in an organization. And in a sense, this model here this is what the book talks about, but it really is all of these 4 things I've talked about. Effort, performance, outcomes. And, in terms of effort to performance, do I have the ability? Then you get into goals. Are they accepted? How about reinforcement? Are the outcomes something I want? Salience? And are they equitable? And if I'm getting satisfaction, it leads to more commitment and then effort. If I'm not getting satisfied, it's going to lead to a number of other behaviors. So, whoops, didn't mean to jump out of there too quickly. So, your book has this model. This is a handout I gave you, but this is from the book. I think they gave 6 guidelines. Establish moderately difficult goals that are understood and accepted. That's goal. Do employees understand and accept? Remove personal and organizational obstacles. And that's goal setting theory or empowerment theory. Use rewards and disciplines appropriately. That's expectancy theory and goal theory. Provide salient rewards, expectancy. distribute rewards equitably, and provide timely rewards. So these are all elements, and that handout's in there. And that's what the book talks about. But I think I find it more helpful to think about it in terms of those four things we talked about, which are elements that I think explain different parts of our behavior and others' behavior. And those are things to think about if you're in a work environment. You can do an awful lot to create a motivating environment for people without necessarily pay or discipline. There are a lot of ways to get people motivated to do a job. And I think it's very helpful in your life of a manager to think about motivation and where, you know, I don't know if you necessarily motivate other people. Motivation comes from an internal place, but you can certainly create an environment where a number of these elements have the ability to thrive and happen. So there's a couple really good videos on motivation in there that I like in the module this week. And you know, encourage you to to look at them. So any questions or thoughts on motivation? You know, money's one of those interesting things. You know, pay is really, really important. Having enough pay is important. And you know, if you're in a job that may give you tons of satisfaction, but you're not making enough money, and eventually you might have to leave it. So at a certain level, pay is really critical, but above a certain level, pay becomes less and less. Just because you get another dollar an hour doesn't mean you're going to work harder. Any thoughts anyone has? Anything anyone like to comment on when it comes to motivation or questions?
I've been there before where like I went and transferred into a job where I got significantly more money, but I would have given it all back just to go to go back to the previous. It was just because the environment was terrible. So it it is true.
It's important that's why I like that job satisfaction survey I gave you. It listed those elements in one of the slides, and it's a combination of those elements of meaningfulness, work, you know, feedback, etc.
For me, sometimes I see money as a motivator to like stay because I don't know if I'd get that salary doing something else. And it's like what you've become accustomed to. So it's a motivator to stay.
Yeah.
And also, if you're like, for me, I'm in a job that's very like regulated and like people are like, checking your work and, um, having, getting a salary boost or getting more money is kind of a motivator to keep going,
Yeah.
basically, and to keep doing it.
So
And to stay in a job maybe I don't love.
right, the task might not be as rewarding. So, you know, maybe you can start to look for some other things that can provide some of those meaningful things or else understand perfectly. But I think it helps to understand sometimes when we might not feel as motivated, might be some of these elements. All right. Any other thoughts? I was going to end. I was going to end with a few thoughts on happiness, to kind of round out the semester. And let me bring up those thoughts. Whoops.
Greg, if I could just ask a question of you, how do you feel one perception of what makes them happy as they progress through their career over years? You know, what motivates them? Say, when they're in their 20s and 30s, trying to make their mark and trying to make as much as they can. And then as you progress through your 40s and 50s, you may have kids in college, you have bills to pay, you have other things on your plate that you really have to take care of. So it's more like, I need to earn as much as I can to take care of all these needs that I have. And then once your kids are out of your house, and then you really don't have as many financial obligations, your motivation and your desire to what makes you tick and what makes you happy may change. I'm just curious to hear your comments on, as your career progresses over years, how things may change as far as what motivates you.
Well, I think some of the, there's different, that's why I think all of these things I talked a little bit about tonight have some say about motivation.
Yeah.
Sometimes that some of those goals you set for yourself can be really strong motivators, and you're striving to get there. And you hope along the way that maybe the work you're performing and bosses and supervisors it kind of fit in along the way. And sometimes I think some of those are more ascendant, given what stage of life you're in, and those financial issues. I have found at times though people who there's a pretty large number. I know it was true. I haven't seen it lately of a lot of research on young graduates from school going out and changing careers at a fairly high rate once they get in. And, a lot of it, money seems to be the major driver. And there's a lot of other things to take into account when you're hitting a job. So I think it's helpful that if you're reaching a point of not feeling quite as much satisfaction, that some of these other factors maybe you need to look at. Maybe you don't act on them right away.
Mm-hmm.
I think my take on it is I think you're balancing a lot of these things as you go through careers. That's kind of what I like about that one survey. It talks about the job satisfaction you have from the work itself you're doing. Now sometimes there's a lot of other things that mitigate against maybe the work you're doing. You have great coworkers you're working with, or bosses, or there's other elements that keep you going.
Yeah. I think, in my own personal opinion and in my experience, the jobs that I've stayed the longest in were jobs where I really liked my coworkers and I enjoyed the culture and the environment.
Yeah.
And most of that was fed because I had a good boss and I had good people around me, which made me want to stay. So I agree with that. Yeah, totally.
I can't tell you how many times people in this class who the impact of a lousy boss has on them is incredible in terms of self-confidence, in terms of motivation, you name it. And boy, you can't underestimate the importance of some of these factors. All of those 5 things I put up there, they're kind of all in the mix. You're kind of mixing them together, I think, in our careers. But I think a lot of people, when it comes to real high satisfaction, they want jobs where, and some of this ties into some of the happiness stuff I'm going to talk about a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for your comments.
Thanks. Now, I had a lot more slides, but kind of what do we know about happy people? Well, more externally oriented. Does extroversion cause happiness because of more social context, or does happiness produce outgoing behavior? I don't know. So what they're saying is happy people seem to be more outgoing. There's self-esteem. You feel good about yourself. It's self-esteem is highly correlated with happiness in individualistic cultures. In America, we live in an individualistic culture. a kind of a sense of personal control, meaning that you kind of have a bit of a sense that you're in control of some things that are happening in your life. You kind of have a hardiness about you, physically you're up and about, you kind of feel emotionally in touch with your high IQ, EQ, I mean. Low neuroticism means that kind of your emotions are in control. You tend to have a more optimistic look. I would maybe add to that kind of living in the present moment as much as possible, not regretting too much of the past and not fearing the future, but trying to live in that present moment. People who can name several intimate friends with whom they share intimate concerns freely are healthier, less likely to die prematurely, and happier than people who have few or no friends. So relationships are pretty important. Being able to connect with others seems to be a trait. If the goal of a society is to raise the daily enjoyment of its citizens, it's important to devise ways to increase relational wealth, we call it. Social support, strong social networks just seems to be very important. We are social beings. Doing versus having. This is some interesting research. Experiential purchases, money spent on doing things, tends to provide more enduring happiness than material things, money spent on having. In a sense, experiences tend to produce more enduring satisfaction than possessions. Experiences tend to make people happier because there's a lot less comparison going on, and they foster social connection. Comparison, the trait we have of comparison, which we all do, especially comparison about material well-being, does lead to less happiness in a lot of people. Many studies have shown that we anticipate experiences. Waiting for good experiences is more positive than waiting for possessions. People derive much more happiness. Think about any of you that celebrate Christmas. Think about all the anticipation around Christmas. Well, it's more the waiting for it and anticipation that brings the happiness than the actual event itself. We tend to enjoy waiting for experiences to happen rather than waiting. You get a material possession, that sense of happiness goes down. And then what they call the flow of happy people. When work is a pleasure, life is a joy. When work is a duty, life is slavery. That's Maxim Gorky, a psychologist, I believe. For many people, work provides personal identity. It helps define who they are. It offers a network of relationships. And work can add focus and a purpose, a sense that your life matters. So people kind of in the flow, they call it. But work is sometimes not satisfying. We can be overwhelmed when challenges exceed our skills, or we can be underwhelmed when challenges don't engage our skills. When challenges engage us and match our skills, we enter an optimal state that Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, in the state of flow. Grover Washington, my favorite saxophonist, used to play a jazz song called "In the Flow." But being in the flow means that you are so engaged with what you're doing in your life that you lose all sense of time. You probably have had experiences in your life where you were so engaged that time seems to go and you don't notice it. So what we aim for is being in the flow as much as possible. And it means to be unself-consciously absorbed. One gets so caught up in an activity that the mind does not wander. One becomes oblivious to your surroundings and time flies. I've been engaged with some really highly cohesive groups working on things, and I've experienced this state once in a while in life, and it's a wonderful state where everything seems so together. His studies have discovered that happiness comes not from mindless passivity, but from engagement in mindful challenge. And that can happen at any time in our life. Involvement in interesting activities, including engaging work, is a major source of happiness. And I mean, any kind of activity we're in. So in summary, happiness, there are several close relationships we have, kind of being committed and in control a little bit of what we're doing, having a social support and a network, and kind of being in the flow in our activities. So those are just a few thoughts on happiness. Here's these slides will be available, but this is a site down at the use of University of Pennsylvania. It's called AuthenticHappiness.org, where there's some research that goes on. So those are my thoughts.